Hi and welcome. Thank you for joining us today for this presentation about the SpeakEasy Home Speech Therapy app. My name is Kyla Edinger. I am a speech therapist and I'm also the founder and chief clinical officer of the SpeakEasy Home Speech Therapy app, which is a parent-focused early language development app. And I'm joined here today by Ken, the founder and CEO of the SpeakEasy app, and he runs the tech side of our app as well, and by Joanna Felton, who is a speech therapist at the Sundrops Center in British Columbia, and she was the principal investigator on our study, which we're here to talk to you about today. She's been a longtime supporter of SpeakEasy from the very beginning, so we're all glad to be with you here today. A few quick items before we get started. You can receive a self-reported CEU for today's presentation, and you can do that by going to the website you see on the screen there, speakeasycommunity.com/CMH. You can sign in and you'll get your certificate emailed to you, and you'll also be able to download session handouts from there. So some quick disclosures. Ken and I are co-owners of the SpeakEasy Home Speech Therapy app, and the Sundrops Center is a SpeakEasy partner, and they received the app free of charge during the course of the study. So we hope that by the end of this hour together, you'll be able to demonstrate knowledge of current research into parent influence on language outcomes. We would like you to be able to summarize the results of the randomized controlled trial of the SpeakEasy app for a speech therapy waitlist, and also list 3 ways that SpeakEasy can be applied to your clinical practice. So I know as an SLP, we tend to have a lot in common, and I bet that many of you out there have a waitlist for your services right now. I bet that a lot of you wish that the families that you work with spent more time practicing the skills that you focus on in your sessions when they're at home. And I bet that a lot of you have, over the last couple of years, integrated teletherapy into your practice in some form. If you said yes to any of those, then I think that the presentation today is really going to resonate with you. Here's the journey that we're going to go through together. We're going to tell you a little bit more about SpeakEasy and where we came from, and about the Sundrops team, the other side of our study team. We'll go through the evidence base that we dove into before running this study. We'll tell you about how we set up our randomized controlled trial and the details and results of that. And then we'll go through some clinical applications, how you can use SpeakEasy in your practice now. And we'll have some time for conclusions and questions at the end. So a little bit more about where SpeakEasy came from. As I said, I'm a speech therapist, and I was working in a birth to 18 clinical setting. And in that setting, I saw that lots of families needed more than what they were getting. They weren't getting all the services they needed, whether that meant they were stuck on a wait list waiting for an evaluation or waiting for therapy, or whether that meant they needed a little bit more help and motivating to practice at home outside of their sessions. And Ken and I put our heads together, and we wanted to create something that would solve some of those problems, to fill in those gaps in services in our field, to improve that home carryover outside of therapy sessions, and also to find a way to use technology more effectively in our traditionally paper-based field. So we designed something that we're really proud of. We started out as a newsletter, actually. We then launched our first beta app just before in March 2020, right when the COVID shutdown happened, and we were able to bring a lot of speech therapists together and test out the app that way. And then we finally released the app in July of 2020, and we've been making continued improvements ever since then. And so we want to show you what we created.
SpeakEasy is a parent-focused mobile app that boosts speech and language development through daily at-home activities. SpeakEasy addresses two core problems. First, we help parents access speech therapy tools when they otherwise would not be available. Second, we help providers extend their impact by reinforcing therapy concepts and motivating home practice between sessions. To start, we guide parents by placing their child into one of 4 language development levels: preverbal, first words, word combiner, or full sentences. Once a user sets up their account, they explore the SpeakEasy language journey, where they can select different sets of activities. Each set teaches a technique, like getting face-to-face, a skill, like joint attention, or a speech sound, like k. Parents watch an instructional video, then read one of 5 related practice activities. Activities include 2 sections. Parents read a detailed description with suggested words and phrases. Then, parents learn why the activity works, and how to adjust it for their child's specific needs, including support cues, ideas for expansion, and sensory tips. After reading the activity, parents try it with their child. This guides parents to spend a few minutes every day focused on speech and language practice, and helps them integrate key speech and language concepts into their daily life. SpeakEasy includes many features beyond our core activities. Users can access interactive articles on important speech and language development topics, like does being bilingual cause delays? The app also offers goal setting, weekly seasonal bonus activities, speech and language skill tracking, and live chat with a speech therapist. In addition to the parent app, SpeakEasy has a professional version with special features for speech-language pathologists and other birth-to-5 providers. Professionals get access to all 4 developmental levels and can send individual activities and articles directly to their clients. We invite you to try SpeakEasy through our free partner pilot program. As a SpeakEasy partner, your organization provides subscriptions for both the professionals on your team and the parents whom you serve. We make it easy for you and your team to start using SpeakEasy right away with virtual onboarding, handouts, and ongoing support. With SpeakEasy at your fingertips, parents and professionals can improve developmental outcomes together.
So now that you understand a little bit more about SpeakEasy and where we came from, I'm going to turn it over to Jo to tell her side of the story.
Hi, my name is Jo Felton. I'm a speech-language pathologist in Duncan, British Columbia. I work at the Sundrops Centre for Child Development, and we serve families with children from birth to kindergarten entry. In the spring of 2020, we had 170 children on our wait list. So how did I get involved with Ken and Kyla? The families I work with show varying combinations and degrees of poverty, whether time, financial, or emotional, and few of them take time to read any of the material that we provide. Research also reports that the average attention span of a human has dropped from 12 seconds in 2000 to 8 seconds in 2013. This may be connected to an increase in screen access and to the use of social media. Anyway, that's 1 second less than the attention span of a goldfish. Anyway, in our sessions, we ask people to put away their phones, but you can see that people are twitchy and ready to access them. And as the majority of people in North America now have smartphones, I wondered whether we could use these to remind families what we are practicing or to use them to show them what we want to do and why. I approached an app developer and began discussions before quickly realizing that while working for a publicly funded nonprofit, I lacked the resources for further development. However, in the course of this exploration, I found well-developed apps need to contain some of the following elements to gain behavioral engagement with their target population. These include clear organization, ready first page design, initial welcoming and onboarding, goal setting, reward for participation, reminders, and the ability to progress and be customized. I've been following the Sandbox newsletter from SpeakEasy since June 2019. It gives language supporting ideas for families to work with their children at different language levels following a Hanon type grouping, such as pre-verbal, first words, and combiners. And in spring 2020, they announced that they were launching a beta version of their app, so I looked into it. Its content aligned with current research into parent-supported child language strategies, and the app looked like they had carefully considered the many elements needed for a successful app design and usage. At the same time, we were mid-COVID restrictions, unable to see families in person, and had shifted to a virtual service delivery. Families were overwhelmed and even less available for service. Our wait list was large, and I wondered if the app could help. So, as evidence-based practice is founded in research, I contacted Kyla and Ken and asked if they'd considered a research project to see if their app was an effective tool for families. I also felt that I needed to do due diligence as there is a financial cost to this material, and I did not want to recommend it without evidence that it was of benefit.
Okay, so we'd like to dive into the evidence base that we looked at when we arranged our study, and a lot of this evidence informs activities in the app as well. We divided that into 3 categories for you. We looked at evidence behind early intervention and its effectiveness. We looked at the evidence behind parent coaching and also at technology and app use.
So let's look at early intervention. I think this is an area that we're all familiar with, but I will go over a few of the things that we were looking at. So Adamson did a review of current literature and based it on an existing framework for establishing language foundations. She recognized that responsive parent-child interactions begin prior to first words and are key to establishing language. And then adding in consideration for environment and epigenetics, intervention can influence developmental trajectories. We also know that there's a critical language period in early childhood and that early intervention improves outcomes. And wait lists are a ubiquitous part of the therapy world in which many areas are having huge wait lists, and this is a contradiction to earlier is better. When we're looking at this idea of language foundations, they can also impact academic outcomes, and Morgan and Pace have done a variety of studies that looks into this. Morgan showed that 2-year-old vocabulary is positively correlated with math and reading levels in kindergarten and also in self-regulation and problem solving. Further, Pace in a longitudinal study showed that language skills at school entry predict not only language, but math, reading, and social skills in grade 5. Then we're going to be looking at parent coaching. Parent-implemented interventions help language development. Kaiser and Roberts, in a literary review of 18 studies, showed that parent-led interactions are as effective as clinicians, and parent training improved child-style interaction along with the amount of language input and interaction and the use of support strategies. Similarly, Devaney did a systematic review and looked at clinician versus parent intervention for late talkers, which are children from 18 to 30 months who only have a expressive language difficulty and are doing well in all other areas. And they showed there were greater gains with parent-directed therapy. Parent knowledge of specific language strategies also improves outcomes. Rowe showed that parent education influences knowledge about language development, and helping families understand cognitive and language development influences child outcomes. An increased frequency of engagement with parents increases child communication. This was shown in the Bigelow study, who sent strategies-focused texts to parents in addition to a home program. These home visit programs were followed up with an increase in a number of texts, resulting in an increase in parent engagement during visits, and the use of targeted strategies, which in turn increase child communication.
Okay, and then on the technology and app use front, there are a few things we know, and one of them is that we are all using technology more. Parents are looking to mobile technology, and they've shown that parents are interested in technology options when asked about treatment. We also know that the internet and app use for interventions increases caregiver knowledge, it increases caregiver feelings of empowerment, and it increases their engagement. There is a Beecher and Buzzard study that looked into using an app for parent-teacher communication in a Head Start classroom setting for communication outside of the classroom. And the parents who used that app reported that they enjoyed that experience. They increased their engagement with their children as a result of using that app. And an interesting point about this study was that specific comments from several of the parents were that they indicated that they would have liked more specific strategies in that context of the app sent to them from the teachers to carry over into their home setting. Another interesting one that we looked at was the McGill study, which used a website for what they called active waiting. So they had parents on a therapy waitlist and they gave them access to this website during their time on the waitlist. And the interesting part about that study is actually that it showed that there was no difference when these parents were just given a website. And the conclusion of the authors there was that we need more than just a website to introduce that active engagement to make use of the waitlist time before therapy. And we know that there really are few studies out there on smartphone apps. They're still relatively new to the therapy world, and especially in the pediatric world. So we feel like we have something to add there. You'll see some of these themes as we continue to talk through our study, thinking about differences in parent engagement between an app and between the more traditional materials like handouts or website links. And that increase in parent feelings of empowerment after using an app. So stay tuned for those. So we also looked at a few of the other resources before diving into what our resource could do. And some of the other resources out there in the technology world are what we would call broad developmental apps, such as Kinadu and Baby Sparks. These are apps that focus more on typical development, not just on speech and language, but broad tips for parents. There are direct child to screen apps. These are sometimes used for speech therapy or for vocabulary development. And they don't necessarily incorporate the parent training piece that the SpeakEasy app does. So they're a little bit different in that way. And then there are some online resources, which we would categorize in the daily activity ideas area. And those look at broad development, not just speech and language. They send short amounts of text, either by text message or in a website format. So they look kind of wide, but not as deep at the speech and language category. And so there aren't really current resources on that provide that depth of speech and language focus and that that cater to parents of children with delays and give them really specific modifications for that situation, or that focus on parent training without the direct screen interaction. So in summary there, speech and language intervention should start as early as possible, but of course are inhibited by waitlist. Coaching on specific language strategies in the home environment is the optimal delivery method for early intervention. And technology offers a huge untapped potential to boost developmental outcomes. So now we'll tell you a little bit more about the specifics of our study and what we did with SpeakEasy.
So we conducted a randomized controlled trial study with the permission of the Clement Centre for Families and ethics approval from the University of British Columbia and Vancouver Island Health Authority. And we were in collaboration with the University of Chicago TMW Center for Early Learning. And how did we decide what to do? So first of all, we came up with some research questions. We wondered, is SpeakEasy a useful tool for families on a waitlist for speech therapy? We wondered whether parents feel more supported by their speech therapy services when they are using the app as a resource for additional learning. And we wanted to know, did parents become more knowledgeable about early language development after using a language development app? And then we wanted to know, does providing an app enable more regular practice than using other speech and language resources that they might be provided with? So in our study, we invited everybody that was on our wait list at the time, which was 173 families, and we sent out emails, and then we followed up with a phone call. And eventually we had 60 families that agreed to participate. And we split these families into 60 and 40. So 60 were in the treatment group and 40 were in the control group. And at the end of the study, after we had lost some people because for different reasons, we had 28 in the treatment group and 20 in the control group who had completed the study. Both groups were called and did an online survey at each point of the study. So at the beginning, at the end of their 3-month period, and then at the end of a follow-up piece. The treatment group was given a 3-month access to SpeakEasy, and the control group were given handouts from websites such as Help Is In Your Hands or from the Herefordshire and Worcestershire Speech and Language Resources website. We wanted to be consistent about the websites that we were using, and that's why we chose those two. So each group were given the phone call and a developmental check-in, and they completed the online survey at the beginning after 3 months, and then the control group were then offered another 3 months using the app, and at the end of their 3 months were asked to complete the survey again. So in a way, there was one group that was enabled to be a longitudinal study.
And a little bit more about the materials that were included in that survey. That included the Speak survey, which I'll dive into a little bit more in a second here, plus some additional parent questionnaire questions that we designed to add on to that Speak survey. We also collected some demographic data of all the families that participated. And in the post-interview, we asked a question about material use, whether that, and for both groups. So the group that received the app and the group that received the handouts. And a little bit more about the Speak survey that I mentioned. This tool that we used was developed by Dana Suskind and the TMW Center for Early Learning out of the University of Chicago. And we were looking for something very specific in terms of how we wanted to assess the parents in this study. We know that research shows us that parent knowledge influences child development outcomes. And it's what closes that achievement gap that we've all heard about in the early years. And so we wanted an objective measure of whether the parents in our study had the right knowledge to help their child with that language development. Speak is one of the only assessments available out there that focuses on parent knowledge. And so it's divided into 7 subdomains. So it's 20 questions total in 7 areas. Some of them are very particularly relevant to us and what we intend to teach using the SpeakEasy app. So there's a language comprehension and production section, there's a literacy section, dual language learning, using screen media, and then some areas of the Speak study are a little bit broader, looking at development outside of what we teach in the app. So cognitive growth, math, social emotional growth, and all of that together gives the parent one composite score. And we use that both pre and post being offered materials during the study. If you would like any more information about this, there's a 2-page summary available, and they are looking for other people to use the tool as they continue to work on the validity of the tool.
So the parent questionnaire was developed because we had more questions to ask than we could find in the Speak survey. So we added another 11 questions, and these gauged parent sentiment towards their child's development and knowledge about specific language stimulation techniques. And parents were asked to rate their answers from 1 to 5. So this is an idea of some of the questions that we asked. Parent sentiment questions included things like, I feel empowered to teach my child language with what I have using at home. And I understand why speech and language development is important in the early years. And I am satisfied with the amount of communication I have with my child. Knowledge questions included things like speaking to my child slowly and using a playful voice are good ways to help them learn more words. Or if I say more to my child throughout the day about what we are doing, they will be able to say more back to me. We also included some demographic information. We were careful not to ask too many demographic questions, but you'll find out later that that perhaps was a newbie error in doing some research and we should have asked some more detailed information. However, we wanted to know, were the parents under or over 30, an idea of their education level, their employment, and whether the child was at home or in preschool or daycare, and how many children were in the family and what were their ages. We also asked some information about how the families use the material that we provided with them, and we were also able to see that a little bit by looking at the data that was connected within the app itself.
Okay, so I will jump in here after Joe and Kyla have set the stage. My name is Ken, and I co-created the SpeakEasy app with Kyla. She is, of course, the expertise behind it, and I put it all together into a nice little package for parents to use. And so as far as the study results, we looked at our results in terms of the research questions that Joe discussed earlier. And our first question was whether SpeakEasy is a useful tool for families on a speech therapy waitlist. And the answer is a hearty thumbs up. SpeakEasy does help families on a therapy waitlist by increasing both the quantity and quality of parent-child communication. What this looks like is that parents are actually 3 times more likely to report improved quantity of communication with their child after using SpeakEasy. They were asked the question, I am satisfied with the amount of communication with my child at the beginning of the study, and then after 3 months, those using SpeakEasy had a 64% chance of scoring their communication with their child higher at the end of the study than at the beginning, whereas those without SpeakEasy just had a 20% chance of giving a higher score. In terms of quality of communication, we saw a similar result where parents who used SpeakEasy had a 57% chance of reporting higher quality of communication with their child after using the app. Those without SpeakEasy had a 40% chance. This is not a statistically significant finding, but it is directionally pointing in the right place. And we talk a little bit more about some of the challenges with our sample size and finding statistically significant results across the board. In terms of our second research question, we looked at whether parents feel more supported by their speech therapy services when they're provided with an app for additional learning. And while we didn't have questions that directly answered this, we did find that based on what we did have data on, that the SpeakEasy app did make families feel more empowered to teach their children language at home. We saw that families who had used SpeakEasy had an 82% chance after 3 months to report that they felt more empowered to teach their child language using what they have at home. Those without SpeakEasy had a 60% chance on the same metric. Some other questions related to this give additional support. Parents with SpeakEasy were more likely to report improved scores on knowing how to help their child with communication, and that they have all the tools that they need to begin helping their child. Our third research question was on parent knowledge. And so this references the Speak survey that Kyla talked about earlier, as well as the parent questionnaire that Joe talked about. And we found that families with SpeakEasy learned more about early language development than those without the app. In terms of the Speak survey score, parents with SpeakEasy improved by about twice as much. This isn't a statistically significant finding, but again, we see that parents using SpeakEasy learned more about their child's language development. Several of our other questions were also related to parent knowledge. For example, parents using SpeakEasy were more likely to report a correct answer on whether physically changing position, for example, getting face-to-face with their child, helps in language learning, or whether pausing is an important technique in allowing their child to speak more and communicate with them more. Our last research question was on engagement, and we've got a nice fat engagement ring there because we did see that parents engaged with the speech and language material much more often with the SpeakEasy app than with the handouts from other websites. So parents using SpeakEasy were 2 to 3 times more likely to use the app 2 to 3 times more often than they used emailed handouts, depending on whether we're looking at actual usage, which is data that we got from the SpeakEasy app, or self-reported data. We have slightly different numbers, but the trend is the same. A highly statistically significant result where we see parents using SpeakEasy much more frequently than they're using handouts. And for some context, the study period was about 90 days. And so families using it 16 out of 90 days is quite a lot. And there were a few families that used it 60 or more days out of the study period, which is to say they came back to the app almost every single day. We also have additional supporting evidence. Joe mentioned that we had some longitudinal data. This was the control group that initially were given handouts of the SpeakEasy app. I'll start this over again since we're starting over. We also looked at some supporting evidence of our longitudinal data that Joe mentioned earlier. Our control group, which initially received handouts from a couple different websites, were then offered the SpeakEasy app. And so after the initial 3-month period where they didn't have the app, they then did use the app for 3 months. And we see the same data trends as we did for the rest of the study. With the same question of whether parents were satisfied with the amount of communication with their child, these 10 parents, when they only had website resources, only 20% of them reported increased satisfaction after 3 months, whereas with 3 months with the app, 90% of them reported increased satisfaction. And so this is all reinforces our original findings that SpeakEasy improves the quantity and quality of communication between parents and children, as well as the self-reported satisfaction of those parents. A couple anecdotes and quotes from parents that at Sundrops were asked to anonymously provide comments and feedback. A couple things they said were that the activities helped them develop a connection with their child. They really liked the app and that it was hugely valuable in the waiting period. On the other hand, a couple families found that they didn't have time to use it and that it would have been more helpful when their child was younger. And this is, of course, related to the fact that their child had been on a wait list for quite a long time, and we weren't able to reach them at the most critical learning period for their child. To give ourselves a little pat on the back, I'll read you one comment that came in. I love the app, really love it. There are lots of helpful activities. I like that you don't need a lot of things to do the activities. I used toilet paper rolls to talk to my son and he smiled and laughed with me. I like the explanations and options for modification. Thank you, anonymous parents. So to summarize our results, we saw that parents felt much more satisfied with their communication with their child after using SpeakEasy. They modestly improved in their knowledge about language development as measured by the Speak survey as well as our parent questionnaire. They engaged with the app much more often than they did with websites or with handouts. and our longitudinal data reinforced our original findings, making us feel more confident that these results are representing the true state of how much the app helped. To jump into a bit of discussion about these results, I will look at the challenges and then pass it off for clinical implications and future research. In terms of challenges with the app, I mentioned earlier that we had a relatively small sample size. We had 48 families complete the full study from beginning to end. And with this number of families, it's simply difficult to find a statistically significant result. Even when some of the findings were in the right direction, they didn't necessarily show that they were certainly due to the SpeakEasy app rather than chance. And that's something that we would have loved to have a larger sample size for. As far as the parent knowledge questions, Kyla alluded to earlier how the Speak survey asks some broader questions than what we teach in the app. For example, questions around math and addition. And so some of the findings with the Speak survey were not as robust as we hoped, given that we didn't address all of the content that was covered in the Speak survey. As well as the study design and sample population challenges, we also did find an unexpected finding, which is that parents who use the app more did not actually report a greater increase in the amount of communication with their child. And so what we see is that parents who use the app only a few times, as well as parents who used it many times, more than 15 times over the course of the study, ended up with fairly similar data. And this could be, again, attributable to a small sample size, or it could be that parents simply got enough out of the app after 5 to 10 uses, and that further use did not have a significant impact. We also looked at demographic data, which Joe had alluded to earlier, and we found that parent education, age, and household status did not have a significant impact on outcomes from the app, as we may have expected. And again, this could be due to sample size, or that our demographic questions lacked specificity, which allow us to dig in deeper. For example, we asked whether families were over or under the age of 30, and only 3 families in the using the app were under the age of 30. So I'll hand this off to Kyla to talk about our clinical implications.
So we've given you a lot of data, and I'm sure you want to know, what does this all mean for me? So we thought a little bit more about what the results of this study mean for the app and for how it can have an influence on the field. And we are really excited about the results that we've seen. We looked at a waitlist population for this specific study, but we've discussed a lot of potential areas that the app could be really influential for in addition to that. So in addition to waitlist management and enabling earlier intervention, we think that it could be really positive for any of those gaps in therapy, whether that is from extended illness, whether that's from patients who can't access therapy for a time due to the cost in their area or due to distance to therapy. We have had some therapists and families reach out to us actually from very rural areas who say we don't have access to therapy immediately, and they've found our resource. So that's an area that we'd like to expand into more. There's also those children who don't qualify for therapy, at least in the US and in many other places as well, and they could still use some support. So the app can be really positive in that situation to help educate parents when they can't get the support of therapy. And we also think that the area of preventive care could be really interesting. This is an area that we haven't tried the app in specifically very much, but those NICU populations, young parents, at-risk populations where this app might be helpful from birth as a preventive tool. And we think that SpeakEasy is really positive on influencing parent-led interventions. So some of that research that we looked into early on in the hour told us that parent-led interventions are the most effective kinds of interventions. And the app here has a really good potential to empower parents, to improve their confidence, and help them to effectively use the time that they have with their child at home so that they can better lead those interventions outside of therapy. And it also shows us that technology, as we looked at in that early research, which has a strong influence on how parents are interacting with their children, the SpeakEasy app can have a role there as a motivator to improve parent engagement with their children, and as a way to really keep the motivation up to resonate with parents today and help them get faster results from therapy. We also thought about some areas for future research. Beyond waitlist populations, the app is already being used in parents' homes. It's being used by speech therapists in conjunction with their therapy sessions, with a lot of use cases. And we'd love to do some more specific research on those populations and see what else we could find in terms of efficacy of the app. We'd of course love to repeat this with a larger sample for more significant findings, since that was a little bit of a struggle for us, as it is with lots of speech therapy populations. We'd also really like to look into an objective measure of child skills. So this was something we discussed at the beginning of the study, and it didn't end up being feasible for this study, but we'd love to look at an objective measure of skills, a standardized assessment like the Rescorla, administered before and after, say, a 6-month period using the app, and see if there is a change in the child's skills directly, in addition to that change in parent knowledge that we know influences the child's skills. And broadening beyond the waitlist population, there are some other populations we'd like to study more specifically, such as those using the app as a supplement to their speech therapy when it's been recommended or suggested by their speech therapist. We'd love to look at those typically developing populations that aren't in speech therapy, but might still be benefiting from the education that parents are provided with the app. And we'd like to look specifically at those at-risk populations that I mentioned previously, and see if we can make a difference by intervening preventively with those populations. So we're moving on to the fun part. It's been a year and a half, almost 2 years since we first started this study process, and we'd like to tell you a little bit more about where we are now and what's new. So I'll turn that over to Joe to give you the update on Sundrops first.
So first of all, I'd like to let you know that we did reach out to the community for fundraising, and they very quickly caught on to the idea that an app for speech therapy might have been helpful. And just like that, we raised $10,000. And we've been able to use that to have a contract for subscriptions with SpeakEasy last year, and we've been able to renew again for this year. With that, we've been able to provide 3-month free access to families, and we are able to track their usage so that some keen families are then renewed after the end of their 3 months if they're a high user. And it's also good to bear in mind that one subscription can be used 4 times throughout a year if you only give somebody 3 months at a time. So you can get a big bang for your buck, if you like. We've used the app for different team members. So we offered it to infant development, and we offered it to supported child development consultants who support staff in daycares and preschools. And these SCD people have been using single strategies for language that they've printed off from the app and then given it to their staff for a particular activity for the whole staff to be working on as part of training them for language strategies in the context of the preschools and the daycares. And infant development consultants have been using it as a supplement to their prevention work that they've been doing. And they've also been using it to help them to work through a particular strategy that they're working with a family. We're also in the middle of a service delivery pilot project trying to provide earlier intervention to families. So we're capturing families when they first come in as a referral and offering them a block of therapy and supporting them with the help is in your hands for parent coaching around early language stimulation, or just using activities and ideas from the app and walking them through the app and activities as parent coaching, and sending them activities from the app after we've been doing in-person coaching, and then giving them a 3-month subscription at the same time.
Okay, and on the SpeakEasy side of things, we have been continuing to add to our content and to make updates to the app, and a lot of that is in response to comments from parents during this study and from speech therapists who've been using the app over a period of time. So we have been working hard on adding articulation sets. Those are on specific speech sounds and different ways that parents can target them at home, along with some cueing strategies that they can use in the home. And we've expanded some skill-based sets. So those targeted skills like joint attention or imitation that children with language delays are often focusing on. And we've also been expanding our professional version of the app, where SLPs and other related professionals, occupational therapists, special educators, can use their version of the app and send and curate specific materials that they want to share directly with the families that they're working with. By the numbers, we have over 5,000 professionals who have signed up at this point, over 60,000 parents who have signed up for the app, and 7 contributing SLPs and 1 OT who are helping us add to our content over time. So we want to dive into a little bit more about how SLPs are really using SpeakEasy and some of those new features. And Jo's going to give you some specific examples from how she and the therapists she works with have been using it lately.
So I went on a home visit, and I was with a family who were already using SpeakEasy, and they were demonstrating to me how they had used the activity for up and down in their house. And so they showed me how they were making little characters march up and down a ramp with their child in a practice of repeated play routines. And so once I saw that that's what they were doing, I was able to help them move down their journey on the app and start to demonstrate and include the pause strategy, and then follow that up by sending them specific material from the app that was highlighting pausing and what they could do to practice during the week. And another child that I was seeing, she was noticing that when she'd stopped using the app, and then when she went back to use it again, she thought that her child was improving in how he was using his language, and that was very reassuring to her. We're using parent coaching as a supplement to the app. And we're also aware that there are techniques on YouTube that are outside of the app, so that if you don't have the app, you can go and look at the face-to-face idea or something like that as a visual explanation as to what you're trying to do to remind them. We're using the skills tracker to show parents how their child has progressed in more detail and as an encouragement. And we're also have a demo account on our iPad, so that when we're in sessions in clinic, we can show families particular things and how the app works. We've also noticed that sending families the link as to how to get onto the material isn't very effective. They don't often follow through. So we need to do some onboarding and march them through how to get into the material and show them in person how to get through the app, so that they're more comfortable after they've left our sessions to be able to explore it themselves. This is a little boy that I was working with, and his mum was delighted that she had a specific activity that she could do with her child. And this was obviously the paper bag puppets. And she really liked this because it was a concrete thing for her to do. She was no longer wondering, how can I help my child? And she also commented that her husband was really pleased that he had something specific that he could do that helped him to engage with his child, who wasn't speaking very much, and he was having a difficult time figuring out how to help him. We also have an activity finder, which I have found useful if I'm looking for a specific activity for a certain language level of child. So if I'm using a first words user and I'm looking for repetition, I can go into the bath time ideas and be specific to them. And I'm also finding that the session planner has been helpful for infant development, because again, they could go into a specific activity and strategy, and the session planner will give them a step-by-step way of walking through the activity, so that there's not an awful lot of planning for them, and it will help them to reinforce the activities that we as speech pathologists have asked them to do with the children. The learning labs are also something that our team has found has been helpful when parents are asking for more knowledge and understanding about why their child is doing what they're doing, or have questions about what to do. And the top three that we found at the moment are questions about pronoun development, thumb sucking, and milestones that need to be achieved before first words arrive.
And then just a few more of the features that we've added fairly recently and been modifying in the app. We now have seasonal activities that SLPs are using frequently. And so each month has 4 activities available, and they're all based around something in the season. So this one that you see on the screen is about springtime flowers and a craft that you can do based on flowers. And a lot of that brings in the vocabulary of the season to help SLPs give that content to parents when it's seasonal, and they can continue repeating that vocabulary. And then we have been working hard on our articulation sets. The way that we've structured these is each of them focuses on one sound and sort of an intro to that sound, and how parents can use specific cueing strategies, along with some videos, as you can see here in the images, to help their child get to that sound, and then following that up with some home-based activities that help them focus on the sound. And as Joe mentioned a little bit, we have a skill tracker, which helps families to tick off skills as their child achieves them, that they're skills that we would expect at the different language levels available in the app. And then we very recently added a word tracker to layer on top of that. And that's something really concrete that families can go through and check off words as their child learns to say them. It's also really helpful because it gives families a chance to have an idea of what some early first words might be. It gives some guidance about what counts as a word and other information that's really helpful in that early adding words period. And our big goal right now is to figure out how to increase our impact and to reach as many families as possible, particularly to reach those underserved populations that don't get as much support as they need. And the way that we are doing that is by creating new partnerships with organizations who are serving those families. We're in our 2nd year of partnership with the Sundrops Center, and we're continuing to expand the partners that we're working with. So if that is something that your organization is interested in, you can go to this QR code or visit the website, speakeasycommunity.com/partner. And you can become one of those organizations that helps to reach waitlisted families sooner, that helps you to plan sessions with cohesive materials around early language techniques and speech techniques. And you can plan sessions and send activities that are related to parents to really increase that carryover at home. So these are the next steps for you. If that's something that you're interested in, you can follow the link again on the right, and you can start a 2-month pilot program with us to see if it's a good fit for your organization. We'll help you along the way in that process, of course. And while you're doing that, you can explore funding options for how this might be able to become a part of your organization. So we have gone through a lot of material over the last hour, and just a quick summary for you. Using the SpeakEasy app improved parent-reported communication outcomes more than alternative waitlist materials. further research to validate the broader applications of SpeakEasy is necessary. We would love to do more. There is a very wide reach of technology, and it offers a huge potential impact on the outcomes in birth to 5 speech and language development. And we are hoping to be just one piece of that puzzle. And of course, SLP collaboration, innovation, and even running a study across 2 countries are all possible virtually. We have done it in the US and Canada, and you can too. So we have just a few minutes left for some questions, and what we're going to go into today is some common questions that have come up for speech therapists about the app. Before we do that, I just want to turn it over to Joe for one more second and thank the Sundrops team for all of their support in this process and all of their participation in the continued development of the SpeakEasy app.
I would like to thank my colleagues, Alexis Van Newkirk and Bruna McKay, who were eager to join in and willing to help me jumping all through the hoops that we had to do to complete this study. So thank you very much to you too.
And if you have not yet signed in on our website, which is speakeasycommunity.com/CMH, you can sign in at that website or scanning the QR code, and that will allow you to get your certificate for the CMH hour. And I will ask a couple questions that we've gotten in previous presentations for Kyla and Joe to answer. A couple of things that that are commonly asked are whether our app is helpful for children with autism.
Yeah, so I will say that we have lots of families with children with autism using the app. And while it is not a program that's specifically designed for that, the language strategies that we're talking about are applicable and definitely help families to get started. And there are lots of modifications within each activity. So we've tried to be thoughtful about how we're presenting material to parents and how they might need to modify the activity when there's no therapist present. So we have suggestions for very sensory-based activities. We have suggestions for modifying if children are having difficulty paying attention, and ways to help engage the child more, and that can be really helpful for those families as well.
I would like to say that recently I've found that we can reorder the way that the journey is organized, so that if you need to start off with joint attention for that particular family, then it's possible to suggest that and move things around so that it makes more sense in the way that the family is progressing through that journey.
A logistics question that we often get is, if a speech language pathologist is using the app and they share an activity with a family by email or text, does the family also need to have the app themselves?
So no, if the professional is subscribed to their professional account, they can share the activity from within the app, and it will send just that activity in the format of the app. But it'll send all of the information attached to that activity with the parent. And so some therapists find that it's a really nice way to curate material and not overwhelm the parent with a lot at once, to create a really guided program for them.
Is the SpeakEasy app available in any other languages than English?
This is something that we are really excited about. Very recently, we now have select materials available in Spanish. So the face-to-face set for professionals, the face-to-face set is available in Spanish. You can switch the language and then send the activities the same way as you would in English, as well as one bonus activity, one of those seasonal activities per month, is also available in Spanish.
And maybe a last question, could you tell me a bit about what content is available in video versus written format?
Yeah, so each of our techniques has a video attached to it. So it reviews the technique with the parent, and tells them about what they should be doing. And then the activity content itself is available in audio format so that parents who don't want to read through that text can listen to what they should do for the activity. And then in addition to that, with our newer articulation sets, there are portions of videos for each sound so that the parent can watch the speech therapist giving cues and see how they should be doing that with the child. I think that about wraps up our time. Thank you so much for participating and coming to learn about the SpeakEasy app today. And thank you to Jo and her whole team for their participation in this process.
Thank you.